Typically, it's on the bottom right of the pop-up.
Well, no, I'll just listen.
Are you
logging
on
back
your
in?
phone, Bob?
I'll let.
What?
Bob, are you on your phone?
Yes.
Well, Glenn, did it?
Are
appear on your-
you zoomed in?
There it is.
Because normally
Never
the
mind.
pop-up
got it
don't
on- I
take
got
up
it
your
off.
whole screen. In
I
the
got it
bottom,
off.
it'll give you the
Yeah.
option.
It's off. Thank you.
Everybody okay?
I think so. Thank you.
Well, it's important to be able to see the slides because that's where most of my information is. So thank you for your kind introduction, Frank, and it's a pleasure to be with y'all. I haven't been to Louisiana in a long time. I love to go to New Orleans, and I used to go to Monroe to do a bunch of medical lectures way back when. Jeepers, that's a long time ago. Why I went to Monroe, I don't remember. Anyway.
You go there.
I think they can hear me.
So,
Let's
let's see.
So
I decided to start with this because I saw this picture on Facebook recently, and I looked at that and I said, oh my God, that's what we all want to do. It's not specifically an antelope, but it sure grows like one, and it has an antelope way in the background of its hybrid. And I think there are lots of things that you can see about this. This plant's been in a pot for a long time. It probably hasn't been touched for a long time. And Upata used to be a wonderful, very favorite hybrid we used to see in shows all the time. I used to have one. I have no idea whatever happened to it. And I just love this picture, and I wish I could grow all my plants to look like that, which is what we should all aspire to. And I can't remember the lady's name. I took it down, and people of my age have a way of losing things. So this is my favorite orchids talk slide. It's an orchid, but it never does anything. And I think that's probably the most common complaint and the most common reason, I hope, why people still join orchid societies, because it's our job to help people's plants do something. And I guess you get hooked on the things. The first award, the second or third award I got was to an orchid species that I bought at Lowe's, of all places. And fortunately, I still have it, and it was awarded in 1995. Art Chadwick used to bring plants. We used to judge in Raleigh, and he's near Richmond, and he used to bring a lot of plants down. And he brought a bunch of antelope dendrobium hybrids, and I said to him, do you have some of those I could buy? And that was the beginning of the end. We had a meeting, an AOS trustees meeting and Eastern Orchid Congress meeting in Raleigh 28 years ago. And Andre Millar, who wrote the book on the dendrobium orchids of New Guinea, or orchids of New Guinea, was supposed to be our keynote speaker. She got sick, but we were able to show her slides. And the key of that talk was Dendrobium lasianthera, which to me is the king of all antelope dendrobium species, and probably the king of all dendrobium breeders in terms of the color palette that it puts on plants. I've bought several seedlings of lasianthera, and I have never survived one bigger than a 2 or 2.5 inch pot. But then I bought a really nice plant of Dendrobium gouldii from Tom Nasser at Carolina Orchids. And it was huge. It came from Mrs. Levy in Tennessee. And it started in a basket, and I was scared to fool with it. So I just kept dropping one basket into the next. And finally it got so big, I had to put it in a large pot, and I needed something that was light because I knew it was going to get heavy, and it was sort of like a styrofoam plastic planter, and you'll see a picture of it in a second. And I put peanuts in the bottom and wine corks all around the basket, just to keep it light and give it something to grow in. And we had our society in Charlotte used to have an orchid show at the Merchandise Mart in Charlotte. And I had to take my plant, I had to lay it down in the back of my wife's minivan because it was so large. And this is the plant. And as you can tell, it dwarfs everything else in my exhibit. And this was the peak of my orchid culture. And everything has been sort of a gradual downhill slide since then. I don't have this plant anymore. The last division of it has died within the last year. And I had no idea what to do to try to save it. And nobody else knew what to do with the pieces that I gave them also. But you can see that there are lots of other antelope dendrobiums down on the floor around this plant on either side of the phalaenopsis. The yellow flowers to the right is the Dendrobium hancockii, and a variety of hybrids.
Dr. Gallis,
Yes, sir.
could it be that these are not long-lived plants, or like they say, the Tolumnias is usually not a long-lived plant, and it just eventually dies? Do you think it's something you did, or do you think it's something genetically in the plant?
Well, I could tell you a big lie and say, I hope it's not something I did. but I really think it's something I did.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So you've seen large ones that are older than this then?
I have never seen Dendrobium gouldii bigger than this.
Ah.
Claude Hamilton has one that got awarded, but Claude lives in Jamaica, and that's not fair.
That's true.
It's just not fair. So anyway, we'll talk. This is going to be the whole topic of this talk is to how not to have this happen. And I think part of the thing is that 9 years ago we moved from Cornelius, North Carolina, just north of Charlotte, which is on a very large lake. And it has sort of a semi-temperate climate, although it does snow and it gets cold, but it doesn't last long. And it was an ideal growing place for my plants. And I left Duke in 1995, and fortunately, I got a decent job and I was able to afford a very large, beautiful Janko greenhouse. This is 800 square feet. It was a great growing environment. It had 3 evaporative coolers down the opposite side, and it was glass and aluminum. And I'll show you how things grew. This is the way it looked inside. I built all those benches myself and ended up with carpal tunnel syndrome and had to have surgery from all the screws that I screwed and nails that I nailed and all of that. But I like to look at these pictures and say, gee, I used to be able to grow plants. And I mean, I don't see anything like this in my greenhouse anymore. And then here where I was growing the antelope dendrobiums, they were on the middle bench that went down the side. They got tons of light. They had a lot of air movement, and they were very happy. Then we moved to Durham, back to Durham, and I had to downsize just because, number one, I couldn't afford it. Number two, I didn't have the room to build that big a greenhouse. So I got a little Arcadia 16 by 18. And the front of this greenhouse where the door is facing south. So the back is the north end. And these are all my dendrobium plants last week. So they're also down the middle. I leave the shade cloth on year round, partly because I'm too lazy to take it off, and partly because I'm scared that I might burn stuff even in the winter. I've contemplated rolling it back to about halfway to get more light in these plants, which are in the front. And the plants in the front get pretty much full sun when the sun is to the south, probably for 3 or 4 hours. That goes through the glass door of the greenhouse, and you can see those plants on the bottom left. These down here are on the very front bench right behind the door, and they get a lot of light. And then right behind them are the taller plants that are over here on the right side. This tallest plant is a hybrid of my Gouldii that I made, that I named for my daughter. It's Dendrobium Gallis, and I'll show you some pictures of that. So I at least have some genetics left of my Dendrobium Gouldii. And this plant here on the right is Laurie Mortimer, which is readily available more or less in the trade, and anybody's interested, I can tell you exactly where to get that. Just before we get into the details, Frank has mentioned that I've been very heavily involved in AOS for over 40 years. I've been a judge for over 25, and I really value everything that the AOS has given us. And I'd like to give credit to the AOS judging program for most of my award slides, and I'm working on trying to get the photographers' names on them. So for the commercial message, that was it, and there's one at the end. The general principle is just like anything that orchid growers learn how to do. You really need to watch your plants, and you need to watch them really carefully, because even experienced growers can get burned fairly frequently, and I've been burned more than I care to mention. So it's important to look for the natural habitat for any hybrids that you grow, and also to know the background and know the species that are in the hybrids that you have, so you can recognize something about the kind of habitat. I mentioned my first little dendrobium that I bought at Lowe's. It turns out that it grows in Northern Australia, and it has a wet and a dry season. And I almost killed it for 4 or 5 years until I found out where it came from, and that it really does not like to be watered in the winter, and it does not like to grow in a pot. I put it in a pot, and the first thing it would do in a pot is make a kiki. And a dendrobium that makes a kiki in a pot, to me, says, I can't stand it in here and I'm trying to get out. So I'm throwing this thing up here in the air, hoping that it'll fall off and get out of this stupid pot that you put me in. So that's one special way of listening to your plant. The other thing is based on whether you're still into books or whether you get all your information off the internet. I think you could do it either way. I have all the really nice dendrobium books just because I love them and because I need them for judging. And there are three really good sources. Howard Wood's huge tome on dendrobiums. It's a funkily organized book, but it's got a lot of information. And the Baker and Baker species culture that is totally on dendrobiums is also wonderful, and I'll show you some excerpts from that. And then if you grow Laturias, the AOS had a supplement on Laturia dendrobiums several years ago, and we can talk about those. So this is my true confession. Frank mentioned that I have 56 AOS awards. Most of the rest of them are to Cattleyas. 20 are to dendrobiums, 13 were to antelope species or hybrids, and of those 13, 6 are remaining alive. So any of you who'd like to leave now, you're welcome to leave, and I won't hold you to it, but this is the kind of expert that we have talking to us tonight. Yes. Somebody have a comment? Okay. Just a few words on the genus Dendrobium, which is huge. It's the second largest to bulbophyllum. The type species is Maniliforme. And I went to Taiwan for the international show one year, and this is the only orchid that we saw in the wild, and it's growing out on the rock cliffs in full suns with its roots surrounded by moss. So if anybody grows Maniliforme or its hybrids, that's a good clue. It was not in bloom, but there's no other possibility that that plant could be in Taiwan. So the distribution, it's important to know the distribution of where these things come from, because that's what you try to mimic in your culture. The plants that come from up here in Southeast Asia and India tend to be monsoon plants, because that's a monsoonal geographic area. The plants down here in Malaysia and Papua New Guinea and Northern Australia tend to be more tropical and get year-round, mostly year-round water, and are out in the hot blazing sun most of the time. And that's really key. And there are a lot of these antelope dendrobiums that come from the islands out here in the Pacific. And islands are ideal places for new species to occur. And that's why there's so many of them down here in the South Pacific. So before we go on, what is a dendrobium? If those of you who might take orchids to shows or take dendrobium orchids to shows, the first thing you'll learn about dendrobiums is the flowers like to hook onto each other, and they're almost impossible to untangle if you let it happen too long. And the reason they get all tangled up is because they have a chin. They have this menum, this chin that's off the back of the column that points out the back side of the flower, and this likes to hook on all of its neighbors. The other thing about dendrobiums is the sepals are fused to the base of the stem. They don't go all the way back to the stem the way a cattleya does or the way a phalaenopsis does. So the only way you can separate the petals and the sepals is to tear them apart. And the other nice fact for any of you who wonder what is the difference between a petal and a sepal, to find out what the sepals are, look at the back of the flower, and they're the first segments that come off of the stem. So the sepals are the cover of the bud, and the petals are always inside the bud and enclosing the lip. So the pollination occurs here, and it goes down the column, which is attached to the stem. And when a plant becomes pregnant, full of seed, and I'm sure you've seen this in your greenhouses on occasion, this is Dendrobium antenatum, which just loves to either be self-pollinated or pollinated by some kind of varmint in my greenhouse. And so the flower starts to fold, where it becomes preserved and lasts forever. And then the stem of the flower, which is really the ovary, begins to swell. And these are full of seeds. And when the seed busts, it looks like somebody, I have no idea what cocaine looks like, but if that's what it looks like somebody spilled cocaine all over your greenhouse. So that's that in a nutshell. And we talked about my former greenhouse and how things happen when we move. And the other thing I'd like to say before I move on is when sometimes people think they can't grow orchids, they decide to write about growing orchids. And so I wrote this article for Orchids Magazine because I love these things so much and I wanted everybody else to see them. So if you're looking for an article that's got a lot of stuff on hybrids and other information, this is from the November Orchids Magazine, and those of you who belong to AOS will either have it or you can access it on the AOS website. Now, getting into culture. I mentioned the most important thing is to understand where the plant comes from and try to use that in understanding its cultural requirements. This is a page from Baker and Baker on Dendrobium antenatum, and the way this book is organized, it has a different section on every recognized and a lot of unrecognized dendrobiums. It tells you what its synonyms are, kinds of hybrids it has. It tells you where it comes from. Common in lowland swamps and coastal gallery forests throughout the entire north and west coast of New Guinea, and may be found at sea level, but they mostly grow at 500 feet, also grow in Solomon Islands, etc. And then you look at the next table that's under Dendrobium antenatum, and it gives you the climate. Now, this is January through December of Australia, I'm assuming. And it tells you the temperature. You have to remember that if it's south of the equator, it's going to be southern hemisphere, and your winter is going to be summer and vice versa. It gives you the average rainfall, and the T max and the T min, and it gives you the temperature range, etc. So this says this is northern hemisphere month, and this is southern hemisphere month. So what we find out about Dendrobium antenatum is it gets a lot of water in the winter in Australia. So since it's southern hemisphere, it's down here. That's key. You don't want to make that mistake. And then it's got a lot of stuff, and this is too small to see and to talk about, but it gives you the cultural recommendations. Some recommended fertilizer, growing media, etc. So I think this is a handy book to start with, and you can probably buy it online because books are so easy to come by. Orchid books are these days because nobody wants them anymore, it would seem. So, basic principles. If it's a species, find out what you can. If you know somebody that grows one in your area, find out how they do it. And if it's a hybrid, try to find out what's in it. And you can research that either in Orchid Whiz or on our Orchid Pro on the AOS website. And the other thing is, I've got a lot of friends in Jamaica and Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, and they grow beautiful dendrobiums, but it doesn't help me one single bit because I can't do what they do. But it did clue me in that they grow those things out there in full sun. Claude Hamilton grows them in full sun in Jamaica. And that's helpful to know. The second thing, and we were talking about this earlier, as long as a plant has good roots, I think you should leave it alone. And so the key comes, when do you know before it gets to be too late, before all the roots that are in the pot rot, before you do something about it? Most of the time with dendrobiums, the front part of the plant has tried to leave the pot anyway. So even if you wait too long, it's only the roots on the back half of the plant that are rotting or dying. And they should still have good roots in the front. And I think in general, what I've learned by bitter experience is to move them up rather than to disturb the root ball or to try to make a division. Maybe cutting off the back of the plant is not so much making a division, but I would try to disturb the viable roots as little as possible. And that said, as we talked about, I have absolutely no confidence when I sit down to try to divide a dendrobium plant. You know, it's easy with cattleyas. You have to know when the plant's going to make new roots, or it's making new roots and you can just see them coming out. That's the ideal time to cut off 3 or 4 bulbs from a cattleya, or cut the plant up and pot them up so those nice new roots can grow down into the mix. And they do that. Almost all cattleya species, maybe except for whatchamacallit, the yellow one that I can't call the name of offhand, which will die if you look at it cross-eyed, in my experience. So an experienced grower, a guy who's grown a lot of dendrobiums in this area and at a greenhouse where my daughter works, thinks you should divide them only in April and May. And I've never really noticed that or paid any attention to it, but it might be something worth carrying around in the back of your head. And I don't know about your plants, but all I can say is that my plants hate it, and the ones that hate it the most have decided to leave me, and they don't complain anymore. The other thing is to watch your plants extremely carefully. The biggest disaster I have ever had is when spider mites destroyed about half of my dendrobiums. And I really had no clue what was going on until the whole thing had just exploded. And they do explode. The leaves were falling off. They were mottled on top. I kept looking at them and saying, what in the world is that? Dumb me. I should have looked at the back or wiped off the back of a leaf with a Kleenex and seen all the orange goo that came from the spider mites. And it was a bad mistake. And while I'm on that, in my experience, there are only 2 pests that really bother dendrobiums, and one of them is spider mites, and the other one is mealybugs. They love to get mealybugs in the crown of a new growth, where the leaves are nice and tender, and you see a bunch of white cotton, or you don't even see the mealybug, you just see the cotton. That needs immediate attention, because those doggone things will explode. They don't seem to do a huge amount of harm, but once they explode in your greenhouse, they're hard as heck to get rid of. Now, my most recent experience, I said on this slide, which I did, I lost my mind about 6 months ago. And when I heard that Roy Tokunaga and H&R are in the process of winding down their business, I decided to order 100 dendrobiums. I just called them up and said, send me as many different plants as you can for a total of 100. And half of them were laturias, which is fine because I really like laturias as well. A lot of them were species, some antelopes, and a lot of the plants were in 1.5-inch pots, and they were very, very tightly root bound. So I had to decide what I'm going to do with these little 1.5-inch square pots that were totally, completely root bound. And I decided to try something different. And you probably know that when you want to pull a plant out of a pot, you need to wet it, and that somehow releases the roots. And you can usually pull the entire root ball out undisturbed if you have wet the pot. And that's what I did with these little 1.5-inch pots. I pulled the entire root ball out, and I dropped them into a 2-inch net pot. They were just slightly bigger than that. And I put the net pots into a larger pot. I didn't do anything to the roots on these little plants. And as you can see, here's a net pot inside of a larger pot. And these plants that come in nursery trays from places like Lowe's or Home Depot that have things like liriope in them, or ivy or Pachysandra or something like that. I think they make ideal orchid pots, and they come with a tray that this size shape pot fits in. So I washed those pots out real good, and I dropped a little net pot like this into the center of this larger pot, put that little root ball in the center of it, and I just dropped orchiata or any bark. I just happened to have gotten a big order of orchiata, so I was deciding that I was going to use it. And so this is classic. This is the seedling bark, and then the next one up is power bark, and then there's a larger one than that. So I put some of the seedling bark in most of these little ones, and I put some of the medium bark in the others, and I didn't touch them. I didn't do anything but just do that. And so here's one of those plants over here, and you can see that here's the little round net pot, and I've dropped it into this larger pot, and this plant is just doing its thing, and moving right along. And here's another plant that I put into a clay pot with the same kind of orchiata around it, and I just put a rhizome clip in there to hold it down without disturbing anything. And then here's another dendrobium that's in the middle of a larger pot that just has bark dropped around the edges. Here's one in a tiny little pot, and this plant's very happy and very healthy, and it's got new growths coming out the other side. And here's some others that I have. It was in a pot, it was happy in a pot, so I decided I'd just lay it in a bigger pot and just let it do its thing and not touch it, and just drop some bark in there. Here's another one. This is a 2.5-inch pot inside of a 4-inch pot, and there's nothing in here. The roots are just going to grow down in that gap, and it's very happy. And then this plant here is my most recently awarded plant. It's it's got a Asian name, and I can't call it off the top of my head, but it's been in this pot for a long doggone time, and it's got oxalis growing in it. It's got some old dead Spanish moss lying on top of it. The bark doesn't look that great. This plant had 3 or 4 beautiful bloom spikes on it, and it's starting to grow over the edge. So what's going to happen to this baby? It's going to go into the next inch large pot, and it will never know that it moved from the bench to the pot, because I ain't going to touch nothing else. And as long as that pot's not too heavy for me to carry from one place or another, that's what she will live in. Now, getting back to Gouldii, this was my Gouldii when it was in a show, and it got a CCM of 88 points and had 800 and some odd flowers on, I can't remember how many bloom spikes. It was in this plastic styrofoamish kind of pot, and it was getting sort of ratty, and I decided that I needed to make some divisions and take it out of here. And this is another plant that I had done a similar thing to. It was in a 2 or 3 inch pot, and I dropped it into a 5 or 6 inch plastic pot and just put seedling bark in the gap. And these roots went on, and they stayed very happy, and I didn't disturb anything back here. So because I couldn't do that with the Gouldii, I decided that I needed to try to cut the rhizome. And the other characteristic of dendrobium orchids is that they don't have much of a rhizome in between the new growths. It's a very short, as opposed to cattleyas, which you usually have plenty of room to make a division. You don't have much room to make a division in a dendrobium. So what I did with this plant was, because I didn't want to disturb it, because I'd already had bad experiences, I took a new single-edged razor blade, and I just took with my hand or with a hammer, I just nailed it into the rhizome and cut it with the razor blade. And I left the razor blade in the cut, facing down, so you couldn't get cut by it. And I just let it sit there for 4, 5, 6 months until this plant got used to having its back end cut off, I thought. And then I said, okay, now I'll come in here and I will gently try to pry this front bulb division out of here and find a pot to put it in. So this is an example of what absolutely not to do. And I learned by this plant is long gone. It's got 2 new roots, 2 new growths. It's got beautiful roots coming out. And I put it in this pot with this bark and secured it tightly. And it never did diddly squat. And it died quicker than you could shake a stick at it. So I'm looking over here. I got this one. This one came from Exotic Orchids of Maui from Mike Blitz. And I said, what the heck am I going to do with this? It's got a new growth with roots all the way up here. It's trying to grow out of the pot. All I can tell you is this plant is still alive, and this is 15 years later. But I'm still not sure what to do with it. I showed you that one before. Now, this is Dendrobium Commons Midnight Blue, which is a really wonderful dark lavender antelope hybrid. And in my previous greenhouse, I was able to grow this thing beautifully. It had growth to about 2 feet tall, lots of bloom spikes. You can see that there's several on each cane. And it got to the point where the plant was top heavy and there was too much plant in the pot, and I needed to try to do something with it. And I'm really not confident that I know what to do with this, other than to leave it or try to put it in a larger pot. And I like to use wine corks because they're plentiful. I'm not quite an alcoholic, but I do have wine corks, and people used to send them to. I used to get wine corks in inter-office mail at Duke Hospital from my friends who knew that I wanted them for my orchids. So I could take this plant, this is what, about a 6-inch pot, and put it in an 8-inch big bulb pan and just do nothing but throw wine corks or a little bit of bark down the bottom and let the roots find whatever they wanted, water it and fertilize it. It's almost like semi-hydroponic growing, because this plant was valuable to me and I didn't want to lose it. I just went out to the greenhouse today and I found out that the piece I have of this plant is in a 4-inch pot and it's about 12 inches tall. It's about this much of what it used to be. So,
Dr. Gallis?
yes.
Oh, well, there you go. That's just what I was going to ask you about. Inorganic material like aliflor or the wine corks in comparison to the orchiata. Have you found a difference in the root growth in that?
I just started growing an orchidiata largely about 6 or 8 months ago, so I don't have enough long-term experience. But from what I've seen, it's working very nicely. Obviously, you can see in looking at these 2 plants that in the greenhouse environment that I was growing in before, these plants were very happy. Down at the bottom, this is lava rock, like the kind you buy for your landscape. You just have to wash all the powder and the dust out of it and sort it into large and smaller pieces. I found that they really loved this, and this plant seemed to be flourishing in aliflor. I don't think they care very much. But like I said, once they got that root ball in this pot, my feeling is that's the most valuable asset you got is the root ball that's in the pot. And you should do as little as you need to do to try to disturb the base of that plant.
So is that whole pot aliflora, or is aliflora just on the surface of that?
You know, I don't remember. I think it's all aliflora.
Okay.
But you know, you could put something else. You could put this lava rock in there, or anything that you want. I don't like styrofoam peanuts because when they get loose, they blow all around your greenhouse. And I just don't like the idea of styrofoam anyway. So you won't find much styrofoam in my plants, but that's what I've used wine corks for, is light spacer. And the other thing that's key, I think, about wine corks is do not break them, because if you break them, they decay faster. My experience with a whole wine cork is it'll last 5 or 10 years or longer. And here's another. This is a beautiful looking. This is the division of Goulii. I mean, what could look nicer than that? It didn't think so. So this is what you get. This is, you know, when you're afraid to do something, this is what happens to you. And I think we all know about other orchid species or other types of orchids, that the roots that are outside the pot, the roots that are in the air, are different from the roots that are in the pot. And these roots for most orchid hybrids and species do not like to be buried. Once they're out here, they're not fit for being inside of a pot, except that if you set them inside of a pot and do nothing to them, then they will grow and they will attach down into the bottom of a large clay pot if you did that. Or you could even put this in a large plastic bulb pan if you wanted to, and just say, all right, just sit there for a while. And every once in a while I walk by and I might throw a little bark in with you and see how happy you are. And then maybe after the thing is acclimated, that you might think, well, maybe I could think about taking the backside off. I don't know. This is just one of those things I think you have to do by trial and error for your own particular growing environment. When you look at this plant, I think it's clear that these canes on the back of this plant are dead. I don't think this plant needs them. So if I was going to do anything with this plant, I'd wet the pot, maybe pull it out, cut this back piece off, and try to keep this whole thing undisturbed with whatever bark it's got on it, and try to brace it into a new pot so that it really had a hard time telling that it had been divided. And this baby right here, just don't let it happen. That's all I got to say. I don't know how retrievable that really is. So I think we've talked about all this. Dendrobiums do not make 3-bulb divisions. They're not cattleyas. They're not happy with 3-bulb divisions. And all I can say is don't do it. These are all the trial and errors that I've made that have been total absolute failures. They look wonderful. They do not work. They did not work for me anyway. You know, I tied this thing, looks like it should have just taken off. If this was a cattleya, it would have thrown a dozen roots in here if it had just been making new roots like this, and it would have filled up this pot in 2 or 3 months. But this thing, no, it just quit. And then this, you know, with this plant right here, this is the top of this plant cut off and set in the pot. That is all I would do if I had it to do over again. I get me some kind of a stake that hooked to the side of the pot, and I'd anchor it tight with some twist ties, and I just leave this pot empty and water it and give it a little liquid fertilizer every once in a while and see if those roots got happy in there. And if they got happy, I might throw in a little something or every once in a while and hope that you really didn't notice that somebody put you in a new pot and then you stayed happy. So let's stop there for a second. Does anybody have any questions or comments or advice to me?
I have a question. When you're using the Archaeata or any organic media, how long before you need to replace it?
I think it depends on your watering and how long things generally last for you. I mean, y'all are in a much warmer, I think, environment than I am. Maybe not. I don't know. Baton Rouge is in northern or central. Is it north or central Louisiana?
South Louisiana.
South. Oh, well, I had that totally wrong.
Yeah.
Near
an hour away from New Orleans.
Yeah. So y'all probably have things decay faster than we might. Again, I think you just have to get your experience and look at the pot. If it was decaying very quickly, I'd try to use something that lasted perhaps a little bit longer, so I wouldn't have to disturb those root balls.
Like the wine corks?
Wine corks or aliflora or lava rock, something relatively inorganic.
You ever use plastic wine corks?
No. I object out of principle.
Dr. Gallis, you probably have tried this. You just didn't mention it. Have you placed another pot where it's growing out of the pot and see if it would grow into another pot's media? Next to it instead of inside, but
yeah.
Next to.
Yeah, one of the Cattleya growers in our area cuts a pot in half and somehow it ties it to the front end of a Cattleya pot, so he won't disturb the rhizome. I haven't done it for dendrobiums. I just set the 4-inch pot into a 6 or 8-inch pot without tying something on the front, because these plants they're top heavy and they like to fall over in plastic, so I try to keep them in clay pots.
What do you think about mounting them?
I think some of the species might do well mounted. I have not tried mounting dendrobium hybrids.
Just because they're so big?
Yes, because they get so big, and I just can't see how. I'd have to have a really big piece of cork or a big piece of tree fern or a tree fern, trunk to tie it onto and see if it would grow up. And there's one other thing that I neglected to mention is, as soon as it gets warm outside, and by that I mean temperatures over 55 at night, my plants go outside, and they go into 2 different environments. One is a bench that's sitting out in mostly shade but gets morning sun, and the other is a bench that has 40%, 50% shade cloth over the top of it. And I take them out there as soon as I can. And between May and October, those are the happiest plants that you could possibly imagine. And when they start, the worst that they look is in March or April, when they've been in the greenhouse for 5 or 6 months, and they rejuvenate outside. They get all the rain that happens. They get whatever happens, they get it. And they grow beautifully. And if I could, I'd move them. If I were brave, I'd move them a little bit further out into the sun and see if I could get even better growths on them.
Let me ask you, do you get many bloom spikes on old canes on your dendrobiums?
Sometimes it depends on the species or the hybrid. If the cane is still green, I will leave it. And if it hasn't had a bloom spike in a year or two, it's not going to. So I just cut them off at the base. Or if I'm not going to show them, I just leave them. I got some nice pictures of species or hybrids if y'all want a few minutes. Otherwise, I'm done.
I'd like to see them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, let's see if I can get this thing back up. Need to get rid of y'all's pictures. There we go. Okay, slideshow from current. Okay. There are a whole bunch of species in this group, and they're really beautiful. Antenatum and Stratiotes are very similar. The only difference is the color in the lip of Antenatum, as far as I can tell. They give you the green twisty petals, and together they make a wonderful hybrid called Samurai that's readily available. H&R's always had plants of Samurai. Relatively easy to grow, nice bloomer, throws lots of spikes, well worth having. Canaliculatum is a miniature species that tends to bring down the size of plants, and it's been used a lot in making miniature or smaller hybrids. If you're familiar with Blue Twinkle has Canaliculatum in its background. Johannes. This is a wonderful species. It is absolutely impossible to grow in my experience, but it's crossed with Dendrobium gouldii, and it makes Dendrobium Touch of Gold, which is a really wonderful hybrid. And H&R used to offer Touch of Gold. I don't know whether they still have them, but it has when it's combined with gouldii, it has this nice yellow lip and brownish bronze twisted petals, and it's compact. It grows maybe 12 to 15 inches at the most. And Johannes is a miniature species, and it tends to grow like Dendrobium maffini that likes rain in the spring and summer, but no rain in the fall or winter. And it likes to be mounted. Strabloceros is, somebody's making hybrids with Strabloceros every once in a while. It doesn't have real strong color. Taurinum has a good history for hybrids because it tends to get that purple color and the purple in the lip, and it looks like a bull. I imagine that's why it's called Taurinum. And then here's my gouldii, which I think is the most beautiful gouldii I ever saw. It was really very nice gold and bright yellow, and I'll show you the hybrid that I made from it. Lineale is white and very floriferous and easier to grow into a specimen, I think. Cochleotes is in the background of a lot of the darker hybrids. This is so dark, it's hard to photograph it. This color is common in a lot of hybrids, and it's a relatively easier species to grow, I think. Helix, another one of the dark colors that's in the background of some of the twisted hybrids. Now, so this is Lasianthera. This is my daughter, Sarah, who works in the greenhouse that you see right there, and she's holding a seedling. I'm laughing. a seedling of Dendrobium lasianthera. Sarah's about 5, 7, or 8. This thing grew to 7.5 feet in my greenhouse. It had this bloom spike on it when I bought it. And I took it to judging and I got it awarded on the bloom spike from when I bought it. And all I can tell you is that Sarah told me at the greenhouse where it was sitting that it went into the compost pile because it is now dead. And I have no earthly idea how to grow this doggone thing. It put up 2 or 3 beautiful new growths in the last 2 or 3 years, and then it just decided that it was done, and it left. And these are the flowers. I think it's the most beautiful thing in the whole group. And I'll show you. This is 6 weeks ago. There was a symposium at Kroll Smith in Apopka on Vandas and Paphs. And in the sales area, you had to walk through Frank Smith's greenhouses to get to the sales area. And out on the path, he set these plants out on the walk just so everybody would have to pass by them and drool. It was the most disgusting act of arrogance. I'm laughing. The most disgusting act I've ever seen. These plants were unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. I almost died when I saw them. So here they are. He put them on the path between the 2 greenhouses. And here's its plant. It's a good 6 feet tall. And this is the pot it was growing in. This is a clue. This is a clue to me. This plant has not been disturbed. Let me show you this. Growth, 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 growth. It hadn't been touched in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, probably 7 years. And it's got sphagnum, it's got its own brand of oxalis, it's got a little fern coming up over here, it's got moss creeping out the side of the pot. What can I say? And I tried to get fancy with mine. I should have just left it. Doggone it. It's got beautiful color types and everything. And then there's Tangerinum and Pseudichnoi. This is interesting because there's some hybrids with Pseudichnoi. And I'll show you one of those in a second. And this is where Pseudichnoi comes from, and Archipelagense. Both of these have been discovered in the last 20 years or so, and they come from this Bismarck archipelago north of Papua New Guinea. Solomon Sea, huge area for dendrobium species right in here. And that tells you something about how they like to grow, I think. So I mentioned Touch of Gold. This is Johannes by Gouldii. You get the best features of both of them. This is a plant of Art Chadwick's that he brought to our judging center. And then I bought this one from him. This is mine. And then this is another one. And then Brown Sugar, which is Gouldii crossed with Cochleodes. And this was my plant of Brown Sugar, long since gone. But fortunately, I managed to cross it with my Gouldii before it died. And it got the best attributes of both. I sent a bunch of seedlings to Jose Izquierdo in Puerto Rico and to sell for their Orchid Society. And he bought one of them, and they got it awarded in Puerto Rico. And this is Dendrobium serragallis, Gouldii by Brown Sugar, and this has the best characteristics of my Gouldii. It's just, I think, absolutely stunningly gorgeous. And this is Jose and Irma. Jose died a year ago, unfortunately. We all miss him. He was a great guy. And Irma decided to retire as a judge. I don't know if you follow them on Facebook or anywhere, but really wonderful folks. And so I also made another hybrid of two of mine plants that I named for my son. This is brown sugar crossed with retro rocket. This is retro rocket, which is a Lasianthera hybrid, and it got the best traits of the Lasianthera coming out of retro rocket, and some of the traits of brown sugar, and you get this wonderful color palette of purples and browns and greens. And then I mentioned the hybrid with Pseudochnoi. This is Christabella. These are the only plants I've seen of it. These were Bob Fuchs plants. He got them awarded 10 or 15 years ago. And just look at the color varieties. It goes from green in the lip to brownish orange with yellow, and then you get the reddish colors coming from Lasianthera, and you get the twisted petals from Pseudochnoi. It's just dynamite. And he named all of them after a species of antelope.
Dr. Gallis?
Yes.
As being a judge, did you have any issues with the fact that these are not flat petaled? Or, I mean, it just seems like to me, I've heard that one of the judging criteria on many blooms is having flat petals, and I've noticed all these curlicues. And how can you tell one is the right shape or not when there's no shape to them?
That's a really great question. And the answer is that those criteria are great for plants that are made from species that tend to be flat, like Cattleya species and Phalaenopsis species and Vanda species. But antelope dendrobiums are a totally different issue. And I'm really glad that you raised that, because this has been a real interest of mine. I went to Hawaii for an AOS meeting about 15 or 20 years ago, and there was an exhibit that was just loaded with nothing but antelope hybrids, and there was not a single ribbon in the exhibit, and none of the plants were awarded. And I asked somebody out there, I said, why don't y'all recognize these are, they said, these are just cuts. They're just cut flowers. And I said to myself, you may think they're cuts, but the rest of the world doesn't think they're cuts. So we need to have some decent criteria for how we might award or reward progress in making hybrids with antelope dendrobiums. So the petals on these plants, the petals are twisted. These are the petals and these are the sepals. So it's the sepals that are curled and rolled. As long as they are rolled and curled symmetrically from side to side and uniformly, that's a characteristic that they get from Dendrobium lasianthera. And as long as the antelopes, the petals are held in some semblance of order and regularity, you got consistency from flower to flower. They're held at nearly the same angle. The petals, they go up, one isn't off to the side. They're symmetrical from side to side for the most part. This one is a little bit off, but you're going to find a lot of them that are a little bit off, but just it's sort of the gestalt of the entire stem here. The rest of the plant has great color. It's fairly symmetrical. The lip presents itself well. So you just got to adapt as a judge and develop criteria for it. There's an FCC to one of these hybrids that belong to Claude Hamilton's son, breeding orchids, that I don't think I've got it in this talk, but to me it was the pinnacle of what an antelope hybrid ought to be. It got an FCC of 90 or 91 points. And that to me is the class of what we should be looking for if we're going to make hybrids out of antelope species.
I'm so glad you said that because I think they're very, very attractive. What do you think the function of those twisted petals would be for the pollination, or does anybody know?
But that's a doggone good question. It's the sexual apparatus that attracts the pollinator. I mean, the pollinators they're interested in this. And you know that the orchids have this mentum that sometimes is a nectary. I can't see one on these flowers. That's probably all there is of it. These two species don't have much of a chin on the back, and there might be nectar if you go in underneath the column here looking for nectar and pollinate this flower. So that's what the bee or the whatever it is that's interested in is this part right here. So evolutionarily speaking, then what the heck is the function of these? It's a doggone good question, and you look at the sexual mimicry in orchid flowers, especially things like ophris and the ones that are shaped like the back end of a bee or a wasp. That's very easy to understand. And it may be that the rest of the color of the flower acts as some kind of an attractant. It gets the notice of the pollinator. It may move, or it may wiggle in the wind, or may serve some function. It almost has to serve a function if we believe how evolution works.
Maybe it's telling us it wants wine corks as media.
No, it's telling you it wants a sip of Chardonnay.
Do you happen to know if any of the crown box impala plants are around, or is that a one-off?
I have never seen. I know that Claude Hamilton had plants of Christabella, and he was making hybrids, and I bought every one that I could possibly find, and not a doggone single one of them survived. They were all bare root. I had to buy them at down at Redland. They were all bare-rooted plants brought in from Jamaica. I potted some of them up. Some of them did put out a new growth, but none of them really made it. I got Christabella crossed with Thai twist, and Christabella crossed back onto Lasianthera, and this, that, and the other. And I got to be a sorry grower because I don't have any of them. It's very sad. But there are things like this. I mean, this just drives me nuts. This is just Thai twist is one of the parents in this, and Thai twist is just loaded with Lasianthera. It's got antenatum and all kind of stuff in it. And then this is Thai twist, and it's got canaliculatum down here on the bottom left in this background. And see, I don't particularly like this flower because it just seems a little thin. It's too tall. I don't know, but these are all award photographs. So, and this is one of Claude Hamilton's hybrids. So to me, this is wonderful form on an antelope dendrobium. The dorsal sepals in these species and hybrids, they twist. They're going to curl. So what you're looking for is some semblance of uniformity of the curl. Do all the flowers sort of do the same thing? And you can see how nice and symmetrical the sepals are. They go out. I mean, if you just think of a path species that has petals that look like this, and they come out and they twist and they're uniform and they're symmetrical. You got a nice symmetrical lip that's relatively flat, that's not too far back. But the striking thing about this flower is the beauty of the nicely gracefully twisted horns. And then here's another one. And look at this plant. It's got lasianthera in the background on both sides. Somebody can grow the doggone thing. And here's another one. This is a pseudochnoi hybrid. And I mentioned Lori Mortimer. This Lori Mortimer Sunshine, Bob Fuchs has this at RF Orchids. This is great. This is a great plant. And this is a cultural award given to Sunshine. It's got 1/4 Dendrobium phalaenopsis, and the rest of it is Stratiodes and Antenatum. And all it took was 1/4 Dendrobium phalaenopsis to give you this nice color and fatter flowers. Maui Sparkle. This is my plant. This plant is actually alive and blooming in my greenhouse right now. It's absolutely gorgeous, I think. Got Samurai as one of its parents. I just love the purple and the white contrast. And then Blue Twinkle. This is, for those of you who don't have a lot of room, Blue Twinkle and Blue Twinkle hybrids, this is the place to go. I bought these from H&R. This is Hawaiian mini stripe, which is this large Dendrobium phalaenopsis type hybrid crossed with Blue Twinkle, and it gave you this compact plant with these really beautiful arching spikes of nice small compact flowers. And it was an unnamed hybrid, and I called up Roy and I said, Roy, I'd like to name this. I got an award on it. Would you mind if I named it? He says, Harry, why don't you name it for yourself? And then you can buy 100 plants and give them to your friends. And I was laughing and I said, Roy, I think what I'll do is I'll do the wiser thing. I think I'll name it for my wife. And so I ordered a bunch of plants from him, and he sent me a compote with a bunch of labels that say Dendrobium Susie Gallis on them. So I'm a happy camper. But I have to tell you, this plant is deader than a doornail. And all I did was try to repot it. I don't get it. And here's another one, and that's it. I can't bore y'all anymore.
I had a question on samurai culture. Are you watering those pretty consistently throughout the year, or letting them dry out in the colder?
Yeah, and I should have mentioned that my greenhouses are more or less one size fits all. The only thing that gets consideration is the little Dendrobium Athene that's on a plaque that I hang up so that I can't water it when I water everything else, and the catasetums. And I've sort of gotten into trying to figure out how to grow catasetums, and I just hang them up in the roof of the greenhouse, or put them on a back shelf, or take them inside and put them right here in this window behind me, and forget to water them for the next 3 or 4 months. And those are the only considerations that I give to special needs plants. So everybody else gets watered once a week or so, or when I go out there and I find a bunch of dry pots, then I'll get the hose and I'll wet the dry pots. I'm not a very scientific, I'd probably make a horrible commercial grower.
Oh, thank you. That's good to know, because I've got one that it's put the canes on it are much fatter this year, and so I'm expecting that I'm going to get blooms out of it. But I know that I set it back by repotting it in maybe like year 2 of when I had it. But anyway, it looks good now, and I just didn't know if I needed to be withholding water from it for a long period of time. So that's good to know. Thank you.
My daughter grows it very well. Sarah works at an orchid greenhouse, which is closing, and they got to be out of there within the next couple of months.
Wow.
And in her backyard, she has 7,200 square feet of greenhouse going up right now.
Wow.
To move all of those plants. And it's basically an orchid boarding nursery. So she knows how to grow things. So a lot of the plants that I worry about, I take out there and let her take care of them. And we'll just have to see how the new environment goes in a totally new greenhouse growing area, and how successful we are at moving 5,000 square feet of plants. It's not what I want to be doing at my age, believe me.
So this is a little bit off subject, but I have a plant that Lisa Taylor Gallis. I assume that's yours.
Yeah.
And it's one of the prettiest little cattleyas that I have. I'm real impressed with that plant.
Which clone is it?
Oh shoot!
Is
I don't even
it
know.
H&R or Nora?
It's Nora. It's Nora.
The story behind that is I was in the AMA used to have a June meeting in Honolulu, and I wrangled away from my hospital to send me to Hawaii for the AMA meeting. So I went out to the Orchid Center. Richard Takafuji was a wonderful cattleya grower back in the 80s and 90s. And I went out there, and I had been there before. And I said, Richard, you got any? Tell me what you've got that's really good. He says, Doc, he says, go over to that bench. He says, I got this. Look for the seedlings of California Girl by Buford. And so I went over there, and I found one. I found 3 plants, and I bought all 3 of them, and I took them back with me, and I got one of them awarded about 3 years later. And I contacted Richard, and I asked him if I could name it after my granddaughter, who at that time was 1 month old. And then Roy Tokunaga remade the hybrid at H&R, and I bought 15 more plants from Roy, and I got 3 of them awarded, and I got either Nora or the H&R clone. I got it awarded also in our judging center. And it blooms twice a year. It's fragrant, it's compact. And other than getting to name it for my granddaughter, I have nothing to do with it, except I think it's just one of the most wonderful hybrids out there.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. It's nice and compact, a beautiful flower on it. And like I said, it blooms regularly.
Do any of y'all use Orchid Pro, or if you belong to the AOS?
I do.
Yeah, if you go into Orchid Pro and search a particular hybrid and awards, you get this. You can pull up a picture view that shows you a picture gallery of 15 flowers at once. Mm-hmm. And I have it somewhere here. Let me see. Nope. I'm not going to be able to find it. Dadgummit. It really irritates me when I have something saved and it sort of disappears. If you do that gallery view and search Lisa Taylor Gallis, there are a whole bunch of awards that were made in Australia, because the Australians used to buy plants from Richard Takafuji and from Roy, because they were in Hawaii and they could get them shipped right down to Australia. And the Australian Orchid Council has 6 or 8 different awarded clones. The interesting thing about it is it's a Cattleya Horus. California Girl is a Horus hybrid, and a lot of the plants of Lisa Taylor Gallis show the bicolored lip from Cattleya Horus. It's just really nice.
Maybe you can show it when you give us our next talk on the Cattleyas.
Absolutely.
I could do that.
Okay. I think we're going to invite you back.
Yes, yes. Well, unless anybody else has any other questions, I guess thank you very much, Dr. Gallis, for presenting. This was really very informative. I learned a lot, and I'm going to have to resist the urge to mess with any of my dendrobiums. Just leave them where they are and let them grow.
Yeah, and I only have one favor. Call me Harry.
Absolutely. Thank you,
Okay.
Harry.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're going to get on to some of our just sort of standard club business, and but thank you very much.
You're welcome. I enjoyed it. Y'all have a great growing season, and hopefully you won't have any nasty hurricanes.
Hopefully not. Hopefully not. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Thank you.
See ya.
Thank you.
Feel free to contact me if you've got any. Frank has my email.
Absolutely, we will. Thank you. You can definitely count on us getting back in touch with you.
Thanks.
All right, everybody. Do we want to just jump right in here, Jim? Do you want to talk real quickly? You have some maybe requests for volunteers or people to help with tasks for the show, or bring us up to date with where you are on the show, or and your mic's off. Jim, your mic's off, Jim.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just now caught that. Thank you for reminding me. I do have a few things to discuss. Excuse me. I volunteered to be our show chairman this year, but I've also acquired a few notes from out of town shows that are coming up, and probably ought to discuss those first. We have the Lake Charles show coming up March 25th, 26th, and 27th. And they wanted to know if we want a tabletop 5x5 or a 5x10, and Lafayette April 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. So the last week of March and the first week of April